Charlie would always say, "These are your children, and you threw them out, and I took them in." Of course, he took them into a nightmare.
There's been 50 million people die since Sharon Tate died, and I got everybody in Santa Claus land chasing me, trying to make me feel remorse for one episode, one psychotic episode in my life.
Sharon was crying and begging, "Please don't kill me. I just want to have my baby." Susan says, and I looked her dead in the eye, and I said to her, "Bitch, I don't care about you or your baby, and you're going to die."
I think the common denominator among these girls, they all had a deep-seated, pre-existing hostility towards society.
I don't know when enough punishment will be enough for me. Sometimes I think of how much I love my mother, and then I think, how can this be? How can this be?
(1969). The hippie movement had reached new heights on a farm near Woodstock, New York. The message was love. The mood was fueled by the energy and the ideals of the late 60s. But across the country, fear had spread in Hollywood, California. Actress Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, had been brutally murdered along with 4 others at an isolated estate.
All I can tell you right now is that we got 5 dead people. We're trying to determine who caused their death.
And 24 hours later, a second killing. A middle-aged couple, Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, had been knifed to death in their own home. The unknown killers left bloody graffiti at both scenes. When the killers were finally arrested, the city was stunned. They looked like average all-American young people. One man, 24-year-old Charles Tex Watson, and 3 women, 20-year-old Leslie Van Houten, 21-year-old Patricia Krenwinkel, and 21-year-old Susan Atkins. They could have been your typical girl next door. Yet their devotion to an ex-convict named Charles Manson was so extreme, it had led them to murder.
It was the first real cult. And these were the first cult killings we knew of in this country.
The very thought of these young women dressed in black, armed with sharp knives, entering the homes of complete strangers in the middle of the night and mercilessly stabbing them to death. I mean, it's so horrendous a thought that it's difficult to keep a thought like that in your mind for a couple moments.
At the trial, the girls, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, seemed prepared not just to kill, but to die for Charles Manson.
Charlie would always say, "These are your children, and you threw them out, and I took them in." They were the children of America, but he perverted them and corrupted them, and they became something else.
Charles Manson was from a poor background and had spent much of his life on the wrong side of the law. He had been in and out of jail, arrested for crimes such as forgery and pimping. But the most notorious of the Manson girls who killed, Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, and Leslie Van Houten, were middle-class children. On the surface, they led comfortable lives in California's sprawling post-war suburbs. Leslie Van Houten was born in 1949, the second of 4 children. She was very close to her father, Paul, a car dealer.
She was very happy and outgoing and very athletic. And she seemed to enjoy life. She just was sometime without care and abandon, I would say. She did break her arm a couple times just by being energetic and being really into whatever she was doing.
She was from a very upstanding family in Monrovia, California. She was a homecoming princess. She was always very, very pretty and very bright.
Patricia Krenwinkel grew up in Westchester in the Los Angeles suburbs. She was the daughter of an insurance agent and a housewife.
Pat was a darn good kid. Didn't complain about anything. No matter where I took her, I never had one bit of trouble with Pat.
Then something happened that left both girls feeling alienated and angry. By the time they were in high school, both Leslie's and Patricia's parents were divorced.
During the time I was brought up, nothing was talked about. I mean, my parents' dissolution of their marriage, you don't talk about that. You don't talk about problems in the home.
I believe that I was desperately seeking someone that I could love and hold on to and call my own. That somehow my dad leaving had left a space there. I was very close to my father, and there was a hole when he left.
Both girls took to alcohol and drugs to numb their pain.
When I was about 15 years old, I began using drugs. And something happens when you use drugs. You begin to find people who, like yourself, use drugs.
Meanwhile, in North Carolina, teenager Susan Atkins reacted to her own tragic circumstances by rebelling. She dropped out of secondary school and worked as a topless dancer in San Francisco.
Susan Atkins was probably the most deprived of all of the women that followed Manson. Her mother died while she was a young teenager. Her mother had cancer. And they told stories about how Susan brought all her friends on Christmas to sing carols under her mother's room at the hospital. She was very affected by the loss of her mother.
1967, the summer of love. For all three girls, Leslie, Pat and Susan, it was their summer of looking for love. And they went to San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury to find it. At that time, 32-year-old ex-pimp Charles Manson was hanging out in the same area. Another of Manson's followers was Lynette "Squeaky" Fromme, who never actually killed for him, but was one of his earliest recruits. Young Lynette's childhood in Los Angeles was overshadowed by her parents' poor relationship. She was quiet and sensitive, but her talents in dancing, drama and poetry frequently put her in the limelight, and she was popular with her classmates.
She came from post-war suburbia, except that this was post-war suburbia in the backyard of Hollywood. She dated a guy named Bill Siddons, who went on to manage a group called The Doors. She was someone who was extremely familiar with media culture and celebrity culture as just an ordinary, average, expected part of growing up.
Although Lynette Fromme was talented, it became clear that she was also troubled. By her final year at Redondo Union High School, her attendance had become sporadic. At an after-school job, the way she expressed her pent-up emotions alarmed some of her friends.
Several of her friends who were working with her in the shop remember this evening where she took the staple gun and just shot up her arm methodically and didn't flinch at all.
Those who knew Lynette speculated that she was suffering because of an abusive relationship with her father. The Fromme family had never been emotionally warm. When Lynette was a teenager, her father suddenly stopped speaking to her for 3 years, whilst living in the same house.
Her father just decided she was not worth talking to anymore, and he decided to exclude her from his life. She wasn't even 100% clear why. She spoke to her mother. If something had to come from her father, she spoke to her mother, and her mother asked her father and then answered Lynn. I mean, you imagine being 13 years old and not being able to talk to your father.
Out on the streets, sexual exploration was rife, as was experimentation with drugs, especially LSD, still legal in the 60s. It was just what Charles Manson was looking for.
Manson had come out of prison and wound up in Haight-Ashbury, and a girl came up to him in the street, handed him a flower, and said, "Love." And he thought, ooh, something's going on here. He'd been in prison for a while, and there was this whole new movement. And he grabbed onto it and ran with it.
In 1967, Charles Manson recruited the first member of his hippie family, a Berkeley librarian named Mary Brunner. At 19, Lynette Fromme dropped out of El Camino Community College and became the second.
Said she was sitting on a curb in Venice, California. Her parents had thrown her out. And she said that this bus drove up, and this man got out, and he looked at her and he said, "Your parents threw you out, didn't they?" And she thought he was a genius and a psychic and everything else. She said, "How did you know that?" And she got into the bus with him, and she never came back.
he waited for, you know, 30 seconds or so, and he said, I can't make up your mind for you. And he said goodbye, and he left. He got about halfway down the block, and I just grabbed everything and I ran.
In Manson, Lynette "Squeaky" Fromme finally found a father figure. She would prove useful to him in managing his rapidly expanding family.
Manson's real talent was that he recruited very young girls, very young and very impressionable, at a time in their lives when they had identity problems and they didn't know where they were going in society, and society was very strange right then.
For the Manson girls, their life outside society would soon take a strange, hallucinatory turn as they fell under Charles Manson's power.